you mentioned at the start, Mark, about our connection around the collective. And obviously a lot of our thinking together is about how we can utilize solution-focused ideas for social change, and not, as well as individual change.
Yeah.
And just in terms of acknowledging people, we mentioned Milwaukee, we mentioned Brief, and another person I found really clear in his thinking and writing about beginnings is Harry Korman from Malmo in Sweden. And and he talks about the common project as his, I don't know if he would see that as a metaphor, but his way of talking about it. And I've always found that very useful. But I also used to wonder about the word common in there, the common project.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, it's similar to contract, perhaps. I would think it was, because I would think, well, it's the client or the service user's project, it's not my project. So I still sort of wonder about that. But at the same time, one of my ways into the Solution Focused Collective came from campaigning that I was involved in and taking part in, as a social worker. That's another part of my professional life. And when I was the chair of the British Association of Social Workers, and was able to sort of help to promote the campaigning role of that professional association. And we were campaigning alongside service users, in particular about government measures on austerity. And I started to think about how could solution-focused ideas be useful in this. And that led to an idea about, because I'd written an article with Peter Unwin, a lecturer from Worcester University, assisted by or together with material provided by service users, social work service users, who contribute to teaching social work, the education of social work students. And we wrote an article called A Common Cause, campaigning on austerity. So it struck me that we had a common cause. To bring a solution-focused idea to the campaign, there was a common project. There is a common project. We are in that together. Workers and service users. So, what are our best hopes from working together? Was a way that I started to help me to sort of start thinking about adding social change into individual change. And it was a common project. So that was, go on, Mark, if you can have a go here. The shift from individual to community and the beginnings.
Yeah, okay. There's another point about the common project idea that if there's time at the end, I might just come back to as well. So for Zebra, the organisation that I worked with, co-founder of 17 years ago, all of us have a bit of a background in community work, community development, and so on, and it's always been an element of our work. And again, as you said, Guy, at the start, solution focus runs through, or we intend that solution focus runs through everything that we do, and is reflected in how we work in everything. So I'm going to just reference something called asset-based community development, which is a recognized approach to doing community development work. And there's a bit of a debate out there about whether you need the A and the B, the asset-based, because there's an argument that says that community development in its essence is already thinking in terms of people's strengths, and also people's working on people's terms and communities' terms on what they want. But to be fair, often the way community development has been done, very often the system drives it, and it does become quite deficit focused. We've been playing with the idea of talking about SFCD, so solution focused community development, because not least because we're confident that solution focused enhances an ABCD, as asset-based community development, ABCD, enhances any ABCD approach, not least because the the solution focused questioning is so questioning is what we do primarily, and we know why we're asking the questions we ask. So you could say that solution focus is a very good way of doing ABCD. So from the outset, if you're working as an ABCD worker, you are getting alongside a community on its terms, and that's something you know, you can't just say I'm doing that. You have to constantly be thinking about whether you're doing that. Again, that might be the intention, but in unintentional, unconscious ways, we may be leaking in our own agenda or the agenda of the organisation we're working with. So in Exeter, for example, the city council is using an ABCD approach, but you know, there's almost a kind of philosophical question there about whether workers for the local authority can be ABCD, because the local authority will have its perspective and its agenda. That's fine as long as you're acting with awareness of that. So getting alongside a community, we're wanting to find out what's important to that community, what people like about their community. So there's all kinds of things I could say, so I won't say too much. But one of the questions is, what I can hear one of my colleagues saying, what do you care enough about around here to do something about? So it's a presuppositional question that there will be some kind of motivation in individuals to do something to enhance their community.
Yeah.
Yeah. Talk to that.
No, thanks. That's and that's something that grabbed me when, I mean, as you know, and this is something I'm currently, you know, learning about, and something I really appreciated learning from you about. And you sent me that article by John McKnight and it was John McKnight.
Matt Russell, yeah.
Matt Russell. Nice summary of ABCD, and I think it was in that also just thinking, as I sort of mentioned, an article like that, we can find a way of, you know, referencing that to people that are listening or watching us talk here. And I'm sure they talk in that article about assuming motivation, that, you know, a person who lives, any person really, will be motivated about something in their local community or for something. So,
and it's funny, isn't it? Because that's such a, sorry guys, it's such a core solution focused assumption that everybody's motivated for something. And specifically what I just wanted to say is, in a community context, one of the most persistent myths is that communities are apathetic. You hear it. I've been hearing it for 30 years plus. You still hear it now. And yeah, this is a wonderfully explicit counter to that myth.
Yeah. So what are you up for? You know, you know, I think the way you, what do you care enough about to, what would you do something about? You know, and so I liked, you know, that connection between the ABCD and solution focused practice and the assumption of motivation. It's a very positive assumption to make, and so I'm currently preparing a 2-day workshop which will take place online with a group of Eastern European Masters in Social Work students, and I'll be doing this with Leoš Zatloukal at the University of Olomouc at the end of May, and using solution focused practice within community work. So it'll be a sort of developmental workshop for all of us. And I've had some fascinating discussions with Leoš about bringing a solution-focused process into community work. And it's really got me thinking about the beginnings of that. I mean, McKnight and Russell talk about visioning. You know, they talk about identifying the resources of the community. So there seems to be, the way I'm thinking at the moment, mapping solution-focused work, the process as I know it, working with individuals and families, into working with a community. certain parts of it seem to map, in my head at least, quite straightforwardly. The beginnings part, is got me really thinking a lot at the moment. And I'm thinking about some of the differences perhaps in terms of beginning to work with the community than working with, say, an individual who sees me as a therapist or coach. And I hardly sort of dare go on, because the next thing I say will show my level of not knowing about this at the moment. But I'm imagining that in community work, the beginning phase might include sort of mobilizing people, finding out who in the community wants to be involved, even deciding what the project's going to be that you're going to be working on together. If any, yeah. So, so, okay, I'll just leave it there really, Marc, that I'm fascinated at the moment to be learning about the beginning phases of community work and how solution-focused ideas might help there, will help there, and what will be different as well.
So I'm just going to say one thing, and we'll maybe tie this up quite soon. And I'm thinking, as I'm listening to you, that in a community work context, I think it's one of the things that's so important at the outset is, and before I say what it is, it's to highlight how different this is from common approaches, alas, in community work context, is, as a worker, let's call it a worker, it really is that getting alongside people and having conversations about, and within the ABCD language, it's a discovery conversations. And it's a conversation where I ask you questions about who you are, what you're into, what's important to you, what you like about living around here. So, let's start with what we like around here, rather than a kind of deficit. We've come in because there's problems here and things need to be sorted. But by a really well-held conversation with somebody, everybody likes to be asked about themselves and asked about what's important to them. That's all that stuff around meanings and values and motivations. That a really well-held, unhurried conversation of that type will is likely to tease out for somebody those thoughts about, I could talk at great length really about this, but that could shift the person's relationship with themselves, begin to help them recognize what matters to them, who they are, what they're good at, how they're important to others. And that's almost like that essential that's the essential beginnings before we begin to think about a project and mobilization. It's like that bit being done really, really well is what will lead to something kind of useful happening next.
Okay. Well, I'm excited to be learning more about this and to discover what's going to come next. In terms of my own learning about beginnings in community work. And I like what you say about the ABCD. Maybe it's a tautology in terms of community development. That's something inherently asset-based about working with communities.
Yeah.
Okay. Should we wind this up, Marc? Maybe just think ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what do you think, Guy? What do you think would be useful? Like, what's next?
In terms of our conversations? Yeah. Good question.
Thank you.
Process and outcome, I'm thinking.
Okay.
Not to sort of go on about the machinery of what we're doing here, really, but I'm looking forward to discovering more about doing stuff online and recording things and making podcasts or videos and putting things out there with a view to contributing to a public conversation. I guess I'm mentioning public conversation. I hope that we will be able to explore further what brought us together, really, the collective ideas, And I'm also hoping to learn more about solution-focused practice from talking about it with you. And so, and doing it in a recorded conversation that we are aiming to put out there, it just put you on your mettle. And there's something about the conversations that I think could be, you know, quite special, really, quite different, to be talking with you about this stuff. So, so how about yourself, Marc? So what are your best hopes or next steps?
Incredibly lazy just to say, yeah, all that. And also what he said, you were very specific around the process and outcome discussion. I'm really interested in that as well. And it's one that's fascinated me in the world of solution focus. And then the other one is just we've veered into the discussion of motivation a couple of times today, and I think there's always value in talking about the whole thing around motivation and what solution focused maybe brings to considerations of motivation.
Good. Okay. Well, I'm just going to experiment a little bit, Marc, because I don't know how you were at the start of this, but I think I was thinking about talking out there to the world, and I very much enjoyed just talking with you in this conversation. So thanks for the conversation today, but I also want to say to anyone who's watching or listening to this, hope this has been in some way useful or interesting to yourselves. There's no guarantee that it will be useful to yourselves. Can we say this at the end? But we've done our best, and I'm sure you've all done your best in listening to or watching it as well, and look forward to doing this again.
Let's see what happens next. Yeah.
What happens next.
Thanks, guy.
Cheers, Marc.